Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the English Daily Book Summary YouTube channel. In order to not stop learning, listen to an English book summary every day for free.
Robert Solomon and Fernando Flores. Building Trust in Business, Politics, Relationships, and Life. Trust is the foundation of strong relationships, effective organizations, and functional institutions. It shapes how people work together, communicate, and make decisions. When trust is absent, relationships weaken, workplaces become disengaged, and progress slows. Many people assume trust is naturally present, but without effort, it fades. Conversations that should strengthen trust often avoid real issues, creating polite but unproductive environments where problems persist. To build trust, people must act with integrity, follow through on commitments, and address concerns directly. When trust is broken, ignoring the issue only deepens the damage. Repairing it requires open conversations, accountability, and a willingness to make lasting changes. Leaders and institutions that prioritize trust create environments where people contribute ideas, take initiative, and work toward shared goals. In this blink, you'll learn what trust is, how it breaks down, and how to rebuild it. These insights will strengthen your relationships, leadership, and collaboration. The challenge of trust. Andrew Grove, the former CEO of Intel, once said that if employees never made mistakes, they weren't trying hard enough. His approach runs counter to fear-driven workplaces where mistakes invite punishment rather than learning. Organizations that rely on strict control create defensive environments, stifling creativity and innovation, and limiting long-term success. Trust is essential not only in business, but also in relationships and politics. Corporate layoffs weaken employee loyalty. Divorce rates rise when trust breaks down. Political corruption fuels public cynicism. And while trust is critical, its fragility means that people must carefully balance transparency with self-protection. Renaissance philosopher Machiavelli argued that power and fear are more reliable than trust, since people act in their own interests. This mindset persists in many organizations, but at great cost. When fear replaces trust, workplaces become inefficient, morale declines, and employees focus on self-preservation rather than collaboration. Fear-driven leadership fosters compliance, not commitment. People do the bare minimum to avoid consequences rather than working toward shared goals. In personal relationships, excessive control leads to alienation, as trust can't grow in an atmosphere of suspicion. Organizations that prioritize power over trust create cultures where anxiety flourishes, making honest communication nearly impossible. Though trust involves risk, it remains the only foundation for meaningful relationships and lasting success. Without it, progress stalls and people become disengaged, acting out of obligation rather than genuine investment in shared goals. Once distrust takes root, it becomes self-perpetuating. When people expect betrayal, they act defensively, pushing others away. Suspicion breeds resentment, which in turn fuels more suspicion, creating a cycle that's hard to break. Cynicism, distrust in a socially acceptable form, erodes cooperation and limits possibilities for genuine engagement. When people assume the worst, they disengage rather than seek understanding. In both personal and professional settings, distrust makes collaboration difficult and trust building even harder. The more people operate with paranoia, the less room there is for creativity, cooperation, and meaningful connection. Foundations of trust. Trust is first learned in childhood. Psychologist Erik Erikson argued that infants develop a fundamental sense of trust, or distrust, based on how their caregivers respond to their needs. A child raised with reliable, attentive care grows up believing that people can be trusted. On the other hand, unpredictable or neglectful caregiving fosters lasting patterns of anxiety and suspicion. These early trust experiences shape how people approach relationships for the rest of their lives. Someone who learns distrust in childhood may struggle to form close connections or believe in the sincerity of others. Recognizing this foundation helps explain why trust varies from person to person. Yet trust isn't confined to personal relationships. In a globalized world, people rely on those outside their immediate circles, whether in business, travel, or digital interactions. Every day, transactions occur between individuals who'll never meet in person, based on mutual assumptions of reliability. This trust between strangers is built through reputations, rules, and reliable conduct. Without it, trade would collapse, international cooperation would falter, and opportunities for collaboration would diminish. Though extending trust carries risks, it's essential for an interconnected society to function. Despite its importance, trust is often assumed rather than discussed, leading to misunderstandings and hidden doubts. Open, honest dialogue prevents these issues. Making expectations explicit helps strengthen trust rather than leaving it vulnerable to unspoken fears and unresolved suspicions. But trust doesn't develop by accident. It requires active effort. It's built through integrity, consistent communication, and following through on commitments. The strongest trust is reinforced through repeated, reliable actions. In organizations, clarity and accountability strengthen trust between leaders and employees. In personal relationships, consistency between words and actions is essential. A single betrayal can undo years of trust building, making ongoing effort critical. Those who treat trust as a continuous process, rather than an automatic entitlement, are far more likely to cultivate lasting, meaningful connections. Misunderstandings about trust. Consider the case of a manager, let's call him David, who hires a new employee, Alex, and assumes she'll meet his expectations, but fails to communicate these clearly. As deadlines pass and performance suffers, David interprets this as incompetence, rather than examining his own role in the breakdown. Frustrated, he resorts to micromanagement and considers dismissal. This also reduces his willingness to trust other new employees. Yet the core issue was never dishonesty, but the false assumption that trust happens naturally instead of being cultivated. This common misunderstanding leads to frustration, disappointment, and environments where trust is stifled rather than strengthened. People often assume trust is absolute, failing to recognize the nuances that define it. This thinking leads to unrealistic expectations in personal relationships and rigid, control-focused structures in workplaces. When trust is assumed to be absolute, any error, even a minor one, can feel like a betrayal, making it harder to repair relationships. Others mistake trust for blind acceptance, failing to recognize that real trust involves active engagement and discernment. These misunderstandings encourage defensiveness and can turn workplaces, families, and institutions into systems of suspicion rather than cooperation. Familiarity often leads people to trust without considering whether that trust is warranted. This kind of simple trust, often formed in childhood, continues into adulthood unless questioned. Blind trust ignores red flags, leaving individuals open to deception. This can occur in environments where authority discourages questioning. Think cults and authoritarian workplaces. Neither form of unquestioned trust is healthy. Real trust invites scrutiny and acknowledges risks. By distinguishing between reflexive trust and informed trust, people can make better decisions about whom to trust and how to engage with others. Clarifying trust and trustworthiness. Unlike David, who saw trust as something that must be earned before it is given, a senior executive, let's call her Charlotte, recognized that trust itself helps cultivate responsibility. When she assigned an important project to an inexperienced but promising employee, Rahul, she knew he wasn't yet fully prepared. At first, Rahul struggled, making mistakes that could have justified withdrawing trust. But instead of reacting like David, Charlotte took a different approach. She maintained trust while setting clear expectations. Rahul improved and ultimately proved himself trustworthy. This highlights a distinction. While trustworthiness must be demonstrated, trust must often be given first before it can develop. Trust and trustworthiness are related but not the same. Trusting is an action, an intentional choice to place confidence in someone despite risk. Trustworthiness, on the other hand, is a personal quality built on integrity, responsibility, and consistency. A well-functioning society requires both. People need to trust wisely, but they also need to prove themselves worthy of trust. Many mistake trust for mere predictability, but real trust is deeper than that. It requires emotional intelligence and ethical commitment. Without the willingness to trust, even the most trustworthy people or institutions can't function effectively. Recognizing that trust is both a virtue and a responsibility helps strengthen personal and social relationships. Trust isn't just about whether someone is reliable, it's a choice shaped by past interactions, present circumstances, and future potential. People often assume that trust and trustworthiness always go hand in hand, but that's not necessarily true. Someone might trust an untrustworthy person out of necessity, or refuse to trust a trustworthy person due to past experiences. Institutional trust adds another layer of complexity. Unlike individuals, organizations lack a single moral agent, so trust in them depends on governance, transparency, and accountability. Understanding these complexities helps people make better decisions about whom and what to trust. Authentic trust. A woman suspects her husband of being unfaithful. Rather than reacting impulsively, she chooses to manage the uncertainty with awareness and deliberation. She continues acting with trust, not because she feels sure, but because she understands that trust requires patience, discipline, and a willingness to engage with uncertainty. This decision reflects authentic trust, the ability to trust while acknowledging doubt rather than avoiding it. People often assume trust is either present or absent, but actually it develops through reflection. Simple trust is an automatic response, often seen in relationships where uncertainty hasn't yet surfaced. Blind trust avoids risk and overlooks potential deception. Rather than rejecting doubt, authentic trust engages with it, making a conscious choice to trust while recognizing its risks. Because it's built with awareness of setbacks, it adapts under pressure instead of breaking. It also evolves through experience, making it more resilient than trust that has never been tested. The relationship between trust and doubt isn't one of opposition, but of interaction. Trust grows through an ongoing process of scrutiny and renewal. Genuine trust requires integrity, responsibility, and self-awareness. People who develop authentic trust don't place faith in others without consideration. They take responsibility for their decision to trust and remain accountable for maintaining it. In personal relationships, trust is strengthened by continued engagement, even when emotions shift. In professional settings, consistent actions and ethical commitments sustain trust, not contractual agreements alone. A signed contract may establish terms, but real trust emerges from the way people act beyond formal agreements. Maintaining trust requires effort rather than assumption, making it a process rather than a fixed state. Trust is deeply tied to emotion. Moods shape whether people feel secure enough to engage with trust or withdraw from it. A workplace filled with anxiety discourages trust, while an environment that values open communication allows trust to develop. Emotional intelligence plays a key role. People who regulate their own emotions contribute to a setting where trust can grow. The emotional climate of a relationship, team, or organization influences whether trust is sustained or eroded. Just as fear undermines trust, a shared sense of purpose strengthens it. Although trust often functions unnoticed, it provides the foundation for relationships and organizations. It remains in the background, making cooperation possible. The moment trust is damaged, it can no longer be taken for granted. And restoring it takes deliberate action rather than assumption. Trust doesn't simply exist, it must be reinforced consistently to remain strong. Cultivating and sustaining authentic trust. How can you trust others if you don't first trust yourself? Self-trust is often the most fundamental and overlooked form of trust. People who lack confidence in their own judgment are more likely to second-guess others and misinterpret uncertainty as a sign of deception. Trusting yourself means believing in your ability to assess risks, recover from mistakes, and act independently. Leaders who struggle with self-trust hesitate in their decisions, making those around them uncertain. Within organizations, low self-trust leads to rigid oversight and excessive control. Instead of encouraging initiative, environments like this rely on micromanagement, where no one feels empowered to act. A lack of self-trust creates hesitation, defensiveness, and a need for external validation. By contrast, when people trust their own abilities, they contribute to a stable and reliable workplace where decisions are made with confidence rather than fear of failure. Institutions must also choose between enforcing strict control or creating trust-based relationships. Take, for example, an American bank which entered a financial agreement with a Japanese bank, relying on a contract that outlined strict obligations. When Japan's economy collapsed, the Japanese bank disregarded those terms and prioritized preserving their business relationship instead. American lawyers saw this as a violation of trust, while the Japanese saw trust as something based on long-term commitment rather than legal enforcement. Their response reflected a different approach. Trust is strengthened when relationships endure challenges rather than depending entirely on formal agreements. Genuine trust is demonstrated in actions rather than written guarantees. Trust doesn't require perfection, but it does demand responsibility and effort to restore it after breaches occur. If a breach is acknowledged and steps are taken toward repair, trust can be re-established. People who ignore betrayals or dismiss concerns weaken trust rather than preserving it. Addressing failures openly can lead to a deeper, more resilient form of trust, because it proves that trust can withstand difficulty rather than being dependent on perfection. Trust influences how leadership functions. Leaders who build trust create environments where people feel secure enough to contribute ideas and take meaningful risks. Trust transforms leadership from mere management into something larger, the ability to guide others toward new possibilities. When employees believe their leaders act with integrity, they contribute more openly and take calculated risks. Organizations that prioritize trust create conditions for long-term adaptability and success, while those that ignore it struggle with disengagement and hesitation. A lack of trust leads to stagnation, while trust allows for creativity and progress. Trust-based leadership requires transparency. Leaders who share information, admit uncertainty when necessary, and engage in open communication create confidence within their teams. Instead of relying on control, they allow trust to guide collaboration. Good leadership depends on reliability, honesty, and a commitment to shared values. A culture of trust enables people to take initiative, make informed decisions, and work together toward meaningful goals. In an organization where trust is strong, leadership extends beyond a single figure. It becomes a shared responsibility among everyone involved. The main takeaway of this Blink to Building Trust by Robert C. Solomon and Fernando Flores is that trust isn't just a feeling, but an active, ongoing process essential for meaningful relationships, successful organizations, and a functioning society. Trust must be built through integrity, clear communication, and consistent actions, rather than being assumed or demanded. While fragile, it's foundational for collaboration, innovation, and engagement, both in personal and professional settings. Fear-based leadership and rigid control structures erode trust, leading to disengagement and inefficiency, whereas transparency and shared responsibility strengthen it. Trust is often misunderstood as blind faith or mere reliability, but authentic trust involves awareness of risks, ethical commitment, and a willingness to engage despite uncertainty. It's cultivated through self-trust, accountability, and mutual respect, rather than rigid rules or contracts alone. Once broken, trust is difficult but not impossible to restore, requiring deliberate effort, open dialogue, and a commitment to long-term relationships. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.